Hey, this is Brian Johnson with Finance and Commerce newspaper. I'm pleased to be joined by Stephen Todd, president of Energy Guy LLC out of Shakopee, Minnesota. And we're going to talk a little bit about energy benchmarking, new state law, and things of that nature regarding energy conservation in buildings and the benchmarking process. Stephen, how you doing today?
Doing well this afternoon. Thank you, Brian.
Hey, thanks for joining me. Before we get into some kind of the topic at hand, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, Stephen, about your business and how you got into the world of energy benchmarking.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm an energy guy. I've been working underneath the Energy Guy moniker for about 13 years now. Looking back, I've been in the HVAC, building automation, lighting controls world for going on 30 years now, I guess. My primary focus is working with investment real estate, large commercial buildings, and over the years, since 2012, I've worked with over 17 million square feet of commercial real estate here in the Twin Cities. My primary focus is designing strategies to reduce energy waste without capital investment. I had a lot of success with that. That's what got me into this business when I realized that the opportunity to reduce energy consumption in existing buildings are ripe with opportunities that don't require additional capital. And that's where I thought energy conservation always seemed to be about that next project. And I saw a great opportunity to try to help promote that type of efficiency, doing the best you can with what you have. I do a lot of work with the Energy Star portfolio manager and the Energy Star scoring system, getting buildings Energy Star certified. A great way to low cost recognition for doing all the right things to minimize energy waste within existing buildings. And I try to strike a balance of being both a proactive advocate, like we're talking about energy benchmarking, to try to help share the word and provide support for those that are looking for the easy button, who don't find it as their core mission, but also reactive support. I do a lot of work to try to be at the right place at the right time, and answer questions for existing clients and prospective clients. And so just look to be on people's radar screen. And then as it relates to today's topic, I've been involved with energy benchmarking in the Twin Cities since Minneapolis passed their original requirement back in 2013. So since then, I've benchmarked 400 buildings here across in Minnesota, as well as across the country, and very interested in sharing with you all the perspective I've got on the new requirements here in the state of Minnesota. So,
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue into the topic at hand. We were talking before we started recording about the that last year the state of Minnesota passed large building energy benchmarking law that impacts most commercial and multifamily real estate professionals in the Twin Cities. The law covers the seven county metro area, along with St. Cloud, Rochester, and Duluth. Tell us more about that, Stephen, how that law works and its impact on commercial real estate.
certainly. For those who may be familiar with, in the Twin Cities here, there's been five municipalities that have had energy benchmarking requirements for large buildings, such that on an annual basis, the buildings had to report whole building energy information to the cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Edina, Bloomington, and St. Louis Park. And that's been in place now roughly for about 5 years across all those municipalities. What the state did is the state elevated the coverage area for buildings that need to benchmark so that they moved from just the five municipalities mentioned to the seven county metro area and the larger cities that you noted also. So a similar requirement. The buildings are required to provide whole building energy information, this time to the state. It's a newly created department or agency within the Department of Commerce that's going to oversee this initiative. And most people, if they haven't cross paths with a guy in a yellow jacket who's out there, beating the drum about this new energy benchmarking requirement. Most people that were impacted by this didn't know about it until they received the letters of notification from the state, which occurred about 3 weeks ago. And those letters would have been received by covered buildings, buildings that are assumed to have to report energy data because of their building type, because of their building size, and their geographic location. So those are the buildings this go around in 2025. Those are buildings that are about 100,000 square feet or larger that are required to start this annual reporting requirement. And that's some 3,500 buildings, plus or minus. And then next year, the floor goes down to 50,000 square feet. So buildings that are 50,000 square feet to 100,000 will join this annual requirement. And at that time, the number is supposed to balloon up to about 7,500 buildings in the area that will be responsible for this ongoing energy benchmarking.
So to meet these requirements, what does it require a pretty hefty capital investment? Or you alluded to the fact earlier that in our conversation that there are lower cost options for achieving benchmarking. Tell us a little bit about the cost impact.
Yeah, so the online tool we use um, to compile the energy consumption data, usually through utility bills, and then it is called the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. In the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, we put in the utility billing information and specifics with regard to the building, physical address, gross square footage of the building, and then some other building specific attributes like estimated number of people in the building and hours of operation. That portfolio manager system is the same one that was used historically for the 5 municipalities that have been reporting in the Twin Cities. It also is the vehicle that's used for the other 40 cities and states that have similar energy benchmarking requirements in place right now. So it's really become the tool in which we use. There's no cost to utilize and work with the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. The real cost of energy benchmarking is really in time and resources. The majority of the folks that I support, they're looking for the easy button. They recognize that this isn't core to their mission. They're not interested in having somebody in-house spend the time to figure this out, only to know that a couple years down the road they may leave the organization, and so they're just looking for some continuity there. CenterPoint Energy, in one of the recent seminars that I attended, where they were talking about this, that they estimated for buildings that it probably runs somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of time to be able to go through this benchmarking process. I think the thumb's a little heavy on the scale. Some certainly would be that complicated, but it's probably more in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 hours. And as with so many things in life, the second time you did it, you do it in half the time. It's just working up the initial learning curve. And then that's kind of the conundrum with this. Since it's an annual requirement, all of the benefit of the learning experience for this year likely doesn't stick by the time that you're around the next cycle. So, but having said that, for organizations that do have the wherewithal and bandwidth in-house to tackle this, it's doable. It's really just a matter of time. I think it's kind of illustrative that the state of Minnesota benchmarking portal that has just tons of resources to be able to help support this activity. They have a 17-page how-to guide on how to go through this, which I think is kind of illustrative of what's involved with going through the process. But the actual expense is really the time invested in working through it. And the other dynamic I would share, because this go around for larger buildings that will be reporting this cycle, the deadline's June 1st. And the one thing that's often not fully understood or appreciated is that even if it takes 4 to 6 hours to kind of go through the process, it takes 4 to 6 hours over a 3 to 4 week period. And especially, and we'll touch on this, if you don't have direct access to the utility bills, it's more like 6 weeks. So it might be that amount of time, but you can't just all do it in one afternoon, especially if you have to rely on the utilities to, accept some information and get back to you and back and forth, back and forth. It just is drawn out, which is the other dynamic that often is a little underappreciated in going through the process.
Okay, and in terms of the new law, what do you suppose will be the impact on the resale market for these buildings that are covered by the law?
That's a good point. The thinking back to the city of Minneapolis when they launched their original energy benchmarking program back in 2013, the thought was that by requiring large buildings to provide energy benchmarking data, and the city in turn making it publicly accessible, and so that it was publicly disclosed, that their term was market forces were going to motivate buildings to be more efficient because they would be at a competitive disadvantage relative to their neighbors. I would say that there's, reason to question that logic. I don't suspect that those dots really connected the way that they had envisioned. There is documentation and research that shows that just by having energy benchmarking programs in place, that it typically results in 2 to 3% overall reduction in energy consumption just by the benchmarking process, which I certainly can respect. But but I think the jury's out a little bit on calling out the really inefficient buildings relative to the efficient buildings because among all the different variables and attributes of buildings and how that manifests itself in the valuations. I think energy efficiency is further down on the list. And so I think that as it relates to how it could impact future valuations, though, is that in this perhaps would be a separate podcast, but the this whole this energy benchmarking requirement is really a foundational component of the next step. And the next step is referred to as building decarbonization. And that's where buildings are required to reduce their energy usage and associated greenhouse gas emissions. And energy benchmarking, what we're talking about here, is a foundational component of that. That's the only way the regulators know, well, how much are you consuming per square foot per year? How does it marry up to your responsibilities, if you will, of where you need to be? And are you going to pay a fine? Or are you not going to pay a fine? So I think that that's the trajectory that the state of Minnesota is on. So a law to that effect was introduced last session, didn't really see the light of day. But the cloudy crystal ball that I look into, and as I support my clients and others, says, if the next election cycle, if if things line up the way they were in St. Paul, like in 2024, I think that the environment would be ripe for support to get energy benchmarking in place. And that would put Minnesota in the same category as cities like New York, Boston, St. Louis, the city of Denver, the state of Colorado, state of California, Oregon, Washington, Maryland, where all these existing building energy performance requirements are currently in place.
Hmm. So do you see us potentially going down that road with those other states?
I do. I think I, my sense is it's not an if, it's a when. And then one thing I have seen as a student of these building performance standards is another term or acronym that's often the BPS is often referred to for this large building decarbonization is that each state, each municipality does it a little differently. And so it's how punitive will they make the fines? Is it really more of a trying to provide additional incentives and resources to draw people in through the process? But the dynamic there's just I see it as a foregone conclusion, which is to ultimately drive towards net zero emissions in buildings. And through a net zero energy consumption, I would argue respectfully that that's almost darn near impossible in the existing built environment. You can build towards that standard, but but to try to require buildings to get there, the sense of, well, you just got to rip out everything and put high efficiency heat pumps is really devoid of the realities and the dynamics, especially within investment real estate, for that all to occur. So right now, the two parties are very far apart. They're starting to come together a little bit more. But I think the sense at least on a city by city or state by state basis. The feeling of um, the dynamics associated with climate change, and if there's the sense that efforts need to be made to try to reduce carbon emissions, they typically look to the existing large buildings as being responsible for 50, almost 60% of those emissions. And so they're incentivized to put requirements for those buildings to reduce energy usage. And I think that it's just a matter of time before that comes to the state of Minnesota. So.
Okay. And just to back up a little bit, looking at your resume, your energy reduction project experience, some interesting clients there. Looks like General Mills World Headquarters, Sprint World Headquarters, Lifetime Fitness, Honeywell's, General Motors. Tell us about that experience working with some of those bigger clients and getting their energy reduction goals met.
A very, very different dynamic in working with the large, Fortune 500 types of organizations as far as commitments they've made and efforts that they've invested in trying to continually move the needle on energy conservation and often associated greenhouse gas emissions, as one would expect. Anytime a new goal has been set, kind of the inaugural effort for most organizations to try to reduce energy consumption is usually a big splash. There's usually some very low hanging fruit, quick payback projects, you rah rah, but that is a darn near impossible trajectory to maintain for very long. Ultimately you get to a point where where the low hanging fruit's been picked. The only projects that are left are long payback projects. And then the reality comes into play, which is all of this energy conservation needs to wrap around the actual business activities within the building. And so if you're a medical office building and you have CT equipment and an MRI machine, I mean, you can only reduce energy consumption in an intensive building like that so much because it's going to use what it's going to use to be able to do what it does. And so we end up, kind of flirting with that line eventually. Um, One thing that, a couple things that I'll share, Energy Guy Insights, kind of what how I term it, which is of all the buildings that I've evaluated, 500, 600 different buildings over the years, the most inefficient buildings I've come across, far and away, are 5 years old or newer. The newer the building, the more likely it is off the charts bad. And that has to do with the way that they're designed, and they're designed to run highly efficiently, and the codes require a lot of fresh air, outdoor air, all these things. But if it's not spinning like a top the way it should, it is geared towards just consuming twice, three times as much as it should. So that's a dynamic that it seems a little counterintuitive to many, but is something that I've seen. The other thing is that for the work that I do, which I'm blessed by doing something I really, really enjoy. But the majority of the clients that I work with, once again, maybe counterintuitive, they don't have really low performing buildings. They don't have the energy hogs of the buildings that can save, reduce energy costs by 50% or 75%. These are organizations that typically have done a lot. And so they're predisposed to doing more. But it's difficult to find out what that next thing is and how do they message around it. And so I spend as much time trying to get recognition and for those that have done a lot, often behind the scenes, to reduce energy consumption. So they get recognized for that, which paves the way for the next thing. But the dynamic that is omnipresent in buildings, which is when it comes to utility spend in existing buildings, it's often the second or third largest operating expense, outside of budget, sometimes rivaling insurance and close to salaries and such. But um, it's a number nobody has confidence in when they budget. When they forecast for it, it's shooting from the hip. And the actual utility costs themselves are headwinds that we face because they could go up by double digits on an annual basis. And then Mother Nature comes into play, and it turns out that the folks behind the scenes that have been making decisions to try to run the building more efficiently, and it's working, but the accountants don't see it because the variance reports don't show it. Nobody gets patted on the back for reducing energy costs by seeing what they're paying on the bills. It really involves a little more of an analysis based around modeling it to understand what they would have consumed had they not doing anything compared to what they did consume, and the difference between the two to try to make it clear that yes, your bills went up by 3%, but they would have gone up by 17%. And that difference, that's what the savings are. And often that's really difficult to bring to light. So,
Well, and when you talk about reducing energy in buildings, you mentioned low-hanging fruit. Give us a couple of examples of that, if you don't mind, and then maybe some of the other things that people can do on the other end of the spectrum.
sure, I'll share with you because it's not meant to be mysterious. But my Connecting the Watts program is something that harkens back to the epiphany that I had back in 2011 working with the Minneapolis Grain Exchange and realizing that even in a 130-year-old building, that there was a lot of opportunity to get the building to run more efficiently that didn't require a lot of capital investment. And it really was paved the way for this strategy that I'll share it here and on my website. I've got it laid out. I support this type of approach, but it is as um, simple as getting stakeholders on the same page with regard to how a building is being run and often around occupancy temperatures and whether or not we allow the building to be less comfortable when people aren't supposed to be in the building versus when they are. And recognizing the dynamic, which is much more prevalent nowadays, is that when we have longer durations, here in Minnesota of 95 plus degree weather and it's humid, or 20 below zero weather during the winter for a prolonged event, that's a battening down the hatches moment. You throw all this energy conservation stuff out the window. You just ride the storm. You get on the other side of it, but then you have to get it building back to where it was before. That's something that almost never happens. But getting stakeholders on the same page with regard to occupancy hours, the temperatures we're maintaining, that's a key foundational component to this Connecting the Watts program. Nobody spends a lot of time talking about that, but that's a huge opportunity in almost every building. So, and then building on that, we're talking about occupancy schedules, temperatures that you're trying to maintain during occupied hours to keep people comfortable. Is there an opportunity to allow those to fluctuate up and down based on unoccupied, a lack of occupancy or nobody in? And then outdoor air ventilation control, probably the single big, we bring in outdoor air to try to ventilate the spaces. Often we're bringing in way more than we need to. So we've got to heat and cool it and push it around and then exhaust it. And so there's huge savings in being able to try to optimize that. And all of it goes back to just trying to get an understanding of how much energy is being consumed and ideally a relative efficiency based on a benchmarking score. So that and once again, we use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager to generate those metrics so that we get a score from 1 to 100. The higher the score, the more efficient the building. And it allows us to compare a 50,000 square foot office building in Minneapolis to a 200,000 square foot commercial office building or medical office building in Miami and be able to say on a scale from 1 to 100, this building is a 43, this building is a 61, and get a sense of relative efficiency of the buildings, but more importantly, what potential savings exist. And that helps pave the way for the conversations about making additional investments or what can be done to try to move the needle on that.
Hmm. A lot of good information there, Stephen. Any other final thoughts before I let you go?
Yeah, let's just to circle back with regard to the energy benchmarking, just a couple additional components of that law that is a little bit under recognized right now is that the buildings that are most challenging are the ones in which you do not have direct access to the utility bills. And those are ones like retail, multifamily, where residents have their own bills, or industrial buildings. And that's a maybe an offline conversation, but the state of Minnesota included non-manufacturing industrial buildings, distribution centers, refrigerated, non-refrigerated warehouses, those buildings that just dot the landscape, across the Twin Cities. None of the five original municipalities included those buildings, but the state did. And so these are buildings in which often the tenants pay their own bills. So ownership doesn't have direct access to the utility information. So getting the information is a challenge. They included in this new law that tenants are required to provide ownership energy consumption data within 30 days of an ask. And so that's usually something we're highlighting when we're communicating to tenants. The other thing is that beginning June 1st, any of these buildings that are covered, these buildings that one can identify either by receiving a letter from the state of Minnesota, or you go on the Minnesota Energy Benchmarking portal, and they've got a lookup tool that you can put in a physical address of a building in the city, and it'll tell you whether or not it's expected to benchmark. And having those buildings, clarity around which buildings have to report and when is extremely important. And so that's using the lookup tool will help with that. And but I'm sorry, I'm bringing full circle back. Um, Beginning June 1st, any of those buildings that are required to benchmark, if the building is sold, the existing Energy Star portfolio manager account needs to be transferred to the new ownership. That's a new requirement and is supposed to help address kind of this transparency in energy, because as a new building owner, you don't have any right to the previous ownership's utility consumption, which is a little ridiculous, but that's the law. And but this new requirement is something that's noteworthy. And the final thing is that the state, on an ongoing basis, is supposed to generate a scorecard and send it to the buildings, and they're responsible to publicly display that on an annual basis, the relative efficiency of the building, which will make Minnesota a little closer to, like, if you've been to New York City, you'll notice that every building on their door has a relative efficiency score. And so that's a bit of a trend. You see it a lot in the EU, but Minnesota's kind of doing their own flavor of that. So that was a couple other things with regard to the energy benchmarking, just I thought was noteworthy. But outside of that, if I can ever be a resource for anybody that's on the receiving end of this video podcast, would love to be a resource. Wearing a yellow jacket, I try not to be hard to find. And any questions that you have, we thrilled to be a resource for you moving forward. So.
And what's the best way to get more information? Just direct people to your website?
Yep, the energyguy.com, is the best way to get to the website. Otherwise, I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. Seems to be another place to connect up. But the website would be probably the best way to get my contact information, as well as any information about what we've touched on today.
All right, great. Well, thank you for your time, Stephen. Great conversation. Hopefully we can stay in touch.
Well, Brian, I very much appreciate the opportunity, and thank all of you that have made time to watch this. And best of luck. Be well and waste less.
Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.